Hello YouTube and welcome to an all new Elder Scrolls lore video. Today we'll be talking about a really obscure Daggerfall era legend. This legend contains the story of the ancient First Era hero Lyrisius. This won't be a super long video since it's super obscure, so let's immediately get into it. So in the early First Era, likely more than 2 to maybe even 3,000 years before the events of the Elder Scrolls V Skyrim, Tamriel looked very different. For one, there had not been a Cyrodiilic Empire yet, and at this time, Skyrim had only relatively recently come under human control at the end of the Mredic era. And other than Skyrim and likely some parts of Hammerfell, the majority of Tamriel was still under the control of the Elvish races. We have very little solid knowledge of this ancient time, but the legend of the hero Lyrisius survived. When Lyrisius lived, northern Tamriel was often being raided by the armies of Akavir. These armies, at the time known as slavers, apparently captured humans living in the northern regions of Tamriel and forced them to work as slaves, likely taking them back to Akavir on their ships to work back on their home continent. Lyrisius at this time was a human warrior, likely a Nord or even a Proto-Nord, who defended the human settlements against the Akaviri raiders. He apparently single-handedly slew hundreds according to the legend, and he even became favored by the Daedric prince Boethia and received the shield Fearstruck, one of Boethia's Daedric artifacts, as her gift. With the Daedric prince's shield and his mighty enchanted spear, Lyrisius and the warriors who followed him were a mighty force to be reckoned with for the Akaviri slaver pirates. But at one point, Lyrisius and his warriors were confronted with a presumably particularly strong Akaviri raiding party, almost as big as an army. This force decimated Lyrisius and his warriors and scattered them. Lyrisius himself was hounded by the Akaviri forces and fled far, far away from any human settlements to a place where the Akaviri would not find him. Eventually he ended up in a large, desolate area where he found a gigantic winged worm, which had the ability to breathe fire and the ability to speak, so most likely it was a dragon, so from now on I'll call it a dragon. This dragon had no intention of letting Lyrisius walk free on the lands that he controlled, so Lyrisius and the dragon fought a long and apparently epic duel in which the legendary shield Fearstruck, a Daedric artifact, was apparently molten to rubble by the dragon fire. Lyrisius was beaten, and the dragon was going to devour him, but Lyrisius pleaded with the dragon and offered his services as a slave to the dragon, since the mighty beast had beaten him. The dragon's pride was so great at this offer that he agreed, and Lyrisius thought, well, let's continue with the flattery, and he told the dragon that he was absolutely majestic, except for one scale on his back between his great wings, which according to Lyrisius had become dull and in need of polishing, but that particular skill was out of reach for the dragon. He couldn't reach it with his neck or with his wings, so Lyrisius offered to polish it. The dragon, in his vanity, allowed Lyrisius on his back to polish the skill, but it just so happened that Lyrisius still had a hidden dagger with him, and he plunged the dagger right under the scale in the middle of the dragon's back. The beast roared and struggled as he rolled, dove from the air, and shook himself with all his strength, attempting to throw the hero Lyrisius off its back, but the hero held firm and held on to the dragon's neck. When the dragon realized that he couldn't throw Lyrisius off, Lyrisius made the dragon an offer. Fly straight on until you see the Akaviri. Use your fire to destroy them, and once they're destroyed, I will remove my blade. The dragon, in pure rage at the situation, shot up in the air and flew towards the Akaviri raiders and completely decimated them with his fire from the air. When it was done and the slavers lay dead, the dragon demanded that Lyrisius remove his blade while they were still flying mid-air, which the hero did, and he quickly leapt off the beast's neck, falling towards the surface, as he knew that if he'd stayed on the beast's neck for longer, he'd have been thrown off and the dragon would attempt to kill him. And, of course, that was the plan of the dragon, as the dragon attempted to kill him as he fell towards the surface, but as Lyrisius was falling, the Daedric prince Boethia appeared to him and changed him into a raven, making him small and nimble enough to lose the dragon in the clouds. We don't know whether Lyrisius was ever changed back, or if this story actually happened on Tamriel, or if it is just a legend. The book even contains a disclaimer that scholars at the time of Daggerfall are skeptic about the story being based in facts, and thus it is most likely a legend. But there are some interesting things about this legend, as usually all legends hold at least a shimmer of truth. First of all, Bethesda, or at least ZeniMax, has not forgotten about this Daggerfall era legend, as a replica of Fearstruck, the shield, is actually available in the Elder Scrolls Online in the Crown Store. At least it is sometimes in November. In its description it even has that it's a replica, because the original one was destroyed in the fight of the hero Lyrisius, and it even directly mentions the Akaviri slavers. Second, the legend itself is at the very least about 1800 years old by the time of Skyrim, as it predates the first Akaviri invasion, which happened in the year 2703 of the First Era. You see, at the end of the story, where the Akaviri slavers are burned down by the dragon, the author of the story says, and I quote, "The Akaviri had no chance against the fire-breathing beast. They have never plagued Tamriel since." You see, that last part is not true, as in the year 2703 of the First Era, about 1700 years before the events of the Elder Scrolls V Skyrim, the first Akaviri invasion took place, where the Saci of Akavir invaded Tamriel in search for a Dragonborn, only to be stopped by Riemann Cyrodiil, who would go on to found the Riemann Empire with their help once they found him as Dragonborn. Watch my introduction to the Elder Scrolls lore video for that full story. Anyway, the forces of Akavir have invaded Tamriel again after this story, in the first Akaviri invasion and then even later in the second Akaviri invasion. Meaning that the story must predate the first Akaviri invasion, as the second Akaviri invasion was in the Second Era, and this story mentions them never invading again, but around the end of the First Era there was another invasion. And add to that the wording, "they have never plagued Tamriel since," which suggests to me that the story was already old when it was written down, meaning that it was likely at least written down 100 years after the story of Lyrisius actually took place, and thus 100 years at least before the first Akaviri invasion, and likely even longer, because the story in its written down form is already written in the form of a legend, so it's already no longer in concrete memory. So I personally think it's like 500 to maybe 300 years old by the time it was written down. Meaning that this story is at the very least 1900 years old by the time of Skyrim, if we take the story of at the time of writing being 100 years old, and it's likely even older. To put that in perspective, 1900 years ago in our time, the Roman Empire hadn't even reached its height of power yet, so it's a really long time ago. But it may even be older, to potentially a maximum of 4400 years ago, which is really cool to me somehow. Anyway, let's not get lost in the math of how I calculated all of this, because there is another very interesting implication to the story, specifically to the fact that the earliest Akaviri pirate raids, which we already knew of happened before the first Akaviri invasion long ago in the First Era, were apparently pretty big groups, as in this story it's actually described as an army, and they apparently came to capture human slaves on Tamriel. You see, if you watched my video on the races of Akavir, which is in the description if you haven't seen it, you will know that there is a debate going on whether there ever lived humans on Akavir, or whether the Saci are in fact humans or not. But this story of humans being taken to Akavir as slaves long before the first Akaviri invasion implies that perhaps the Saci civilization had humans as slaves in it, or later, maybe after the pirate raids stopped after the story of Lyrisius, they perhaps were no longer slaves and rather part of the Saci civilization, perhaps as a sort of second-class citizen. That would explain the contradictory sources of the serpents and humans among the Akaviri armies in the invasion, as they may have both been in there, as the Saci brought human combat slaves or drafted humans into their army for the first Akaviri invasion, explaining the human Akaviri ghosts in Oblivion that we see, and at the same time it explains the really long lifespan of the Akaviri potentates, who were described as serpent-like, as both of them fell under the Saci banner in that first Akaviri invasion after the pirate raids had been done and the humans had been integrated into the Saci civilization, first as slaves and maybe later as normal second-class citizens or even regular citizens. So, pretty interesting story, and to me at least even more interesting implications. But that's my cue to end this video, because that's basically the entire story, and I really hope that you learned something. And if you did, consider returning for the next Elder Scrolls lore video. But before I really end the video, allow me to thank my top Patreon supporters: Mr. Bernardo Binda, Gabriel Binda, Polarized Putin, Athena Hyodis, Andrew Jordan, Doji, Fenrir, Sort of Bushido, Tarmekal, and Mr. Christmas. It is thanks to these people and all the others on screen that this channel stays alive and produces videos like this one, and for that I am very grateful. And that said, I hope to see all of you in the next Elder Scrolls lore video. Bye bye.